Hello, and welcome to this week's Second Gen's Liberated Panda with my co-host Angel Tang and myself, Jason Wirt. Today we're going to discuss a couple things about America and China's respective different vaccine diplomacy methods. To put it bluntly, who's winning at it? The Chinese or the Americans? And who do we think is going to win in the future?
First, we're going to discuss China's vaccine diplomacy.
Then we'll go over the latest development and the fatal flaw just reported last night about the inefficiency of the surging COVID infections in countries that have used the Chinese COVID vaccine.
Second, we're going to discuss America's vaccine diplomacy.
And then thirdly, we're going to discuss who's winning in the vaccine diplomacy war between the two superpowers. But first, let's talk about something that's even more interesting, more so on the home front than the vaccine diplomacy, and that's the vaccine hesitant population in America.
Yeah, so Jason, this is something that's very interesting to me because I come from China where people are not vaccine hesitant at all. So with so many people around the world wanting to get vaccinated, it seems very strange that there's anti-vaxxers in America and elsewhere, from what I understand, who are extraordinarily stubborn in their beliefs. So for our viewers out there, would you explain who anti-vaxxers are and what they believe and why?
Well, most anti-vaxxers, or I guess you'd call them the vaccine hesitant population of the United States, they have a bunch of varying beliefs that kind of lead them to that situation. I think I've heard estimates up to 40% of the population is hesitant for at least the COVID vaccine, not necessarily other vaccines. The rationale ranges from different situations. I know some individuals who are hesitant just on the COVID vaccine. Their argument is that it's still an experimental vaccine, which is true. There's individuals who have had COVID who don't understand the need to get a COVID vaccine once you've had COVID, which honestly our government has not done a good job of explaining why you should. And then also there's individuals who are just skeptical of everything with the government. As for the political spectrum, I mean, they range everywhere, Trump supporters to hippies. So, I think the anti-vaxxing phenomenon that we hear about in America from decades ago really started with the hippie population, and it's kind of moved forward, and now it's gotten a little bit more mainstream. But kind of as political alliances, per se, have changed, that's kind of maybe moved into both ends of the spectrum. So both political parties, really.
So Jason, you're in the medical field, and that's your area of expertise. So from your perspective, do you think the anti-vaxxers or the vaccine hesitant people have a cause to be worried?
I don't think they necessarily have a cause to be worried. I'll give you a couple different scenarios. I know that when the vaccine came out, the government said that if you already had COVID, you should still get vaccinated. They didn't give a reason why. They said it was to protect against different variants. At that time, back I think it was 3-4 months ago, we hadn't had any variants that really took hold in the United States. And honestly, to this day, I really don't think we've had many variants that took hold throughout the world. There's a South American variant that apparently picked up in the UK, and then Indian variant, which seems to be picking up steam. But I mean, those were weeks ago, and at this point, those variants probably would have moved and would have grown into bigger issues, which we haven't really seen yet. But they said that the vaccine would help against the different variants that natural immunity wouldn't. I don't think that that's accurate, at least from what I've seen. I haven't seen studies to prove that. And they didn't really release any information. It was just kind of conjecture. They thought that that was it, their best guesstimates. Then there's also the idea that once you get a virus, your body creates an immune response to it. Mm-hmm. Originally, they had said that it was only if you've gotten COVID within the first 6 months, you were good, but anything past that, they weren't sure. But the problem that they were running into with that, when you read between the lines in those studies, they had only studied it for 6 months. Studies came out saying, we know that innate immunity is good for 8 months. Well, that study was only done for 8 months. So their assumption is that at the end of that study, they couldn't guarantee anything further in terms of immunity, but they weren't actually saying, hey, we only did the study for 8 months. This is good. The thinking became, oh, you only have immunity for 8 months. You need to be vaccinated. There was a recent article in, I think it was Nature journal,
Mhm.
that said that they are finding out now that the immunity, if you've had COVID, is lasting a lot longer, and is a lot stronger than what they thought, even stronger than the vaccine. There was also arguments now that the vaccine that they used, it's a new type of vaccine. Why did we need a new type of vaccine for this? That's another argument I've heard a lot of.
Mm.
One of it, the vaccine targets what's called spike proteins.
Mhm.
I know part of the vaccine hesitant population will note properly, or will note, especially a Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. I know that she's big in that sphere, and she noted that the spike proteins actually the name is apparently copyrighted by Dr. Fauci, so they can't do studies on them, and that's kind of something that's brought up. Maybe in the conspiracy theorist realm to some, but we're living in a world where things 3-4 months ago that were conspiracy theorists or theories are now being proven true. So who knows how that's going to look in 2-3 months, but we'll get back to you on that.
Right. No, very true. Yeah, but and then they're also talking about like booster shots too for like this. That's why I'm thinking like maybe there's some validity to that whole your antibodies like disappearing after a while after you get
I
COVID.
there's there's been no studies done to prove that the antibodies disappear. They've only not done studies long enough because COVID hasn't been around long enough. Or
Hmm.
it has, and they don't want to do the studies because they don't want to admit it. Frankly, we don't know what we don't know anymore because,
Right.
there's theories out there. COVID's been around since 2019 and it's just been suppressed in Wuhan and it hasn't really gotten out until it did. And now we know what it is. People were experiencing symptoms like that in 2020, right? Before
Right.
Thanksgiving. And,
Yeah.
I think North Florida had a big outbreak of a flu-like virus.
That's
And it
interesting.
was, if you remember that was the initial in the early days of COVID when people were talking about when did it come over. They had that in the fall of
Yeah.
2020
Yeah.
before it came over with all
Yeah.
the same symptoms, loss of, the real classic COVID symptoms, the loss of taste, the breathing issues, 2-3 weeks after you've recovered, those type of things that really dial it in whether or not it's COVID or it could be a false positive. So, I mean, we don't even know when it's come over. I've heard the best guess is probably around Thanksgiving, but that would denote that it's been in China a lot longer.
That's very interesting that you mentioned Florida because I think that's possibly how I got COVID. And it's exactly around when you're talking about it in November. My daughter went over there. She got flu. She got the flu,
Well,
and
November
then,
19, not 20.
right, exactly.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then she got the flu and then she brought it home. And then I ended up getting like COVID, even though I didn't go out. So maybe there's some validity to that, but we'll see. You're right. We don't know what we don't know. Conspiracy theories that have been conspiracy theories, such as UFOs. Hey, like now they're like a thing, maybe.
Remember the COVID built in a lab from bats,
Right, exactly. Like they were
right?
saying, absolutely not.
Now
So,
Jon Stewart's on the late night show talking about it, and
yes,
everybody's acting like he's normal. And you're like, dude, 2 months ago you were a Yahoo. You were a far right wing conspiracist for saying stuff like that. Now you're just
exactly.
a normal person asking questions. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, I know. Just using your critical thinking skills. So I have friends who are anti-vaxxers and I love them, but I don't understand them. And they think I'm crazy for getting vaccinated. So, it's an interesting phenomenon. But since we're talking about COVID and vaccines, let's talk about the surplus that we have in America since so many people aren't getting vaccinated. There's more like demand. No, there's more supply than there is demand. So since the demand is rapidly slowing down in America due to the anti-vaxxers or whatever other factors, America's finally sending out our surplus of vaccines. So I think America did a major flex when they delivered all those doses of COVID-19 vaccines in Taiwan in the military plane. I thought that was pretty baller move. What did you think when you saw that? I was beyond shocked, but thrilled. It seemed
Well,
like ingenious to me.
uh, well, I mean, I'll be honest with you. Members of Congress will fly
Mhm.
in many cases. I mean, I know that they're chartered, but whenever the federal government sends stuff, they don't send it FedEx or UPS. They send it in mass like that to foreign countries. It would be done in like a C-130 or one of the various cargo planes. So it looks a lot more baller than it might actually be, because it's kind of standard. I'd expect to see that. When you think about it, public health really is a national security issue. And I do want to go back for 1 second. You might not recall during Dr. Fauci's one testimony, I believe it was the one we talked about it a couple episodes with Rand Paul, where Rand Paul was really grilling him. Somebody else had mentioned to him. They asked how many people in the NIH, National Institutes of Health, excuse me, and I think NIAID, I think NIAID, the percentage of like how many of the people were vaccinated. And they said at that point, people were individuals who worked there were turning it down. I believe he said something around 40% of those individuals working there in those offices, in like NIH, had turned down the vaccine. So these aren't typically people that you would view as anti-vaxxers, like how you would view anti-vaxxers, like, I don't want to give my kid, whatever, meningitis vaccine, this vaccine, chicken pox, that vaccine, they have chicken pox parties, stuff like that. They're not, it's not the typical anti-vaxxer. So the connotation of anti-vaxxer, I think is really, is kind of harsh. When it comes to COVID, it's more, I would say, because of the nature of the vaccine itself, maybe should be more skeptical. That's an interesting point to bring up, because those are people that you wouldn't expect. And what does that really tell you? And that leads into the vaccine surplus. It is a national security issue. We do have a surplus, and we have a surplus because we're able to produce it. And we've kind of hoarded it for ourselves. So now it's our turn to give it out. Was it a baller move? Yeah, of course. And who are we going to give it out to? Who does it benefit us? Someone like Taiwan obviously is a big benefit to us, because they're really on our front lines when it comes to our international relationship with China.
Yeah, no, I think it was actually like a bit more strategic than that. So like, even though like you mentioned it was like maybe the norm to like send, our products not, via FedEx to like other countries, like for Taiwan specifically, from my understanding, it's huge, because I've read and I've heard that like American military in their uniform, they can't be in Taiwan in any shape or form, with the exception of maybe like at the embassy, or maybe not even then. So we've accommodated China all these years by respecting their wishes. But now that we've flown a military plane into Taiwan, China's always said, hey, if you do that, we're going to see it as like an act of war, basically. And because they claim Taiwan is Chinese territory. So that's why it was huge news, in my opinion. So
China claims Taiwan is their sovereign territory, and that to them it's a big deal. That's interesting. I never knew that about the uniforms. It brings up a very valid point, though. What is China going to do about it? Because China views that as the United States basically invading their sovereign territory. What they did end up doing is that they did fly 28 sorties, or 28 of their jets over or in Taiwanese airspace, which apparently is the largest amount that they have ever for an escalation. So there's that. Ultimately, what are they going to do? What can they do? I mean, they're in a rock and a hard place. The U.S. has a pretty firm relationship with Taiwan. China, though, China, to be perfectly fair, is not in a bad spot. They're publicly in a rock and a hard place, but privately, I think that they have their ducks in a row, and their cards are all sorted in their hand. We've talked about it before, right? They own a lot of our congressmen and women and people in our government. It's no joke. There's samples of the Hunter Biden laptop out there, and it has CHINA all over it. You could say that they're not true, that they're not accurate, and that's fine. Time will tell, right? Yesterday's conspiracy theories is tomorrow's news. So,
right.
We'll see. But, we know that the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken's done a lot of stuff over in China and Ukraine. We know that. So the idea that they're not in the back pocket is weird. We know from the Schweitzer book, I can't think of the title right now, that Hunter Biden flew over with Joe when he was vice president on Air Force Two to China, and Hunter stayed behind and sealed a business deal, which was patently illegal. And so that's not anything weird. we know what's going on. We know those
Yeah.
relationships. So I think China kind of, public show, private action is more the route they're going to take. As long as they can keep the respect issue up so that they can play the game in private, I think that that's what they're really looking to do.
I mean, I think it's just interesting the way America played this because they also brought Japan into the mix, right? Because Japan also donated at the same time the vaccine. So they issued a joint statement to China. And then I believe they flew that aircraft, that military aircraft with the three Congress people, to senators to Taiwan from South Korea. So you kind of have like China like cornered almost, which I think is like, I think it's a brilliant move. So we'll see. I mean, again, time will tell, right?
Well, it was always going to kind of be that way because Chinese aggression in that part of the world directly affects the Koreans, the South Koreans. It
Yeah.
directly affects the Japanese, obviously the Taiwanese. But you just have a lot of shipping lanes, cargo, the cost of cargo, the cost of goods. For example, why is milk so expensive in Hawaii compared to everywhere else in the continental U.S.? Because they got to ship it in. Stuff's expensive out there because it has to be shipped in from the mainland. So same idea. Things that have to get shipped in, the further they have to go around, the more expensive they're going to be. So, China getting those shipping lanes in the South China Sea is very important.
Mm.
And it affects all those nations. So I can see why they want to put pressure on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And they want to protect their sovereign territory, Japan and South Korea and everything, and everyone. Who else? Yeah, all the Asian like.
Well, they also want to protect the global order right now as it currently stands. Post World War II and Bretton Woods, they've gotten a really solid deal. Let's face it, Japan. If we didn't work to build Japan back up after World War II, where would they be right now? If we didn't work hard with and opening up our market to them, opening up our market to the Koreans, having a more, I don't like the term necessarily to use here globalist, but a global economy, right? Our focus of importing goods rather than, hey, let's just make it ourselves and internalizing that, nationalizing stuff like many nations have done. A lot of nations in Europe have nationalized things. We have not. So in Europe as well, they've nationalized things we have not in the U.S. at all. We're still a taker of most of a lot of our goods, I should say, and those nations have benefited from it. So they want to keep benefiting from it, and they want to use that as a launching point as the world changes.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens as time moves on. But I think we have a good alliance like that we're building with the G7 and then also over there in Asia. But moving on from the surprise U.S. visit to Taiwan, we can go back to talking about the vaccine diplomacy between U.S. and China. So let's first talk about China's vaccine diplomacy.
Right. So China recently has been shipping. I know the most recent news I saw, they shipped their vaccines to over 40 nations in Africa. If a lot of our viewers are familiar with the One Belt, One Road or One Belt Road, there's a bunch of different ways to call it. But it's the idea of China helping build infrastructure in Africa and Southeast Asia via very expensive loans and then possibly taking it back from some of the countries. An example, they built a port, I think it was in Kenya, and they charged them high interest on the loans. Kenya couldn't pay back. They took back the port. It's China's way of, kind of going in and offering to build stuff, right, and then basically taking it back to create its own not sovereign piece of territory, but its own base that it can use for its advantage.
Right.
Excuse me. China's already got a big presence, I know, in like Angola and other places in Africa. So China's really been focused on the African continent now for well over a decade. The vaccine diplomacy is a good example of it. Many people there are not, it's not really first world. It's second world, third world. And many of the people there don't have access to vaccines. That's an issue we have in China. We talk about it here in America all the time, or in China, I'm sorry, in Africa. We talk about it in America. So the idea that China can go in because they have all this vaccine, even if it's only 50% effective, right, which is what we talked about a few weeks ago, their vaccine's only been 50% effective. The question is 50% better than none? In Africa, it's a very interesting question as we find out, why Africa may not have been hit with COVID as hard as other places. There's theories, there's some good scientific evidence, some good evidence as to why it hasn't, but, there's still a need for vaccines there. So is 50% better than none? Sure. And I think that in those developing parts of the world, that's a huge benefit to the Chinese vaccines that don't work as well as the Western ones.
Yeah, have you seen the latest news though, where they're saying that those people that have taken the Chinese vaccine, they've been reinfected with COVID. So it's not it's not even 50%. It's not a very effective vaccine at all.
I mean, wasn't there a cruise ship? Actually, what's interesting? I believe there was just a cruise ship of all vaccinated individuals in the Caribbean. And didn't they come back and say that a bunch of them caught it too?
Yeah, I think so.
COVID. Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of got to ask yourself the question, what are we really vaccinating for? And is it even good?
But it's it's an honor system too. It's not it's not like you can really prove it other than the vaccine card, which I don't think, I've never been asked to someone to see my vaccine card, So
you're really, right. You're right. It would be an interesting proposition though. Because I know that a lot of states, obviously, I know Florida and Texas now, it's illegal to request or require vaccination cards for stuff because of civil liberties and all that. But from my understanding, the cruise was 100% vaccinated, and I thought it was verified. That's something good to look into. But people apparently still caught COVID. So, I mean, they're saying the vaccine is 99% effective, but who
knows? Who knows, right? Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding, and we honestly, COVID right now has died down so much. One could ask, is it because of the vaccine, or is it just because the virus just isn't as strong as it was? You do naturally go through cycles. Look at last summer, right? Last summer it died down. Was it because we were socially distancing? Was it because we were wearing masks? Was it, for whatever reason? But then it picked back up in the fall. Obviously when the weather got cooler, people were sneezing more, people were coughing more. The droplets, the way that it's given from person to person, it increases even with wearing masks. Masks are effective to a certain degree, but even Fauci had admitted in his emails what masks don't help as much as what people might think, especially the ones off a grocery store counter. So, I mean,
we do have some data though, because they say states with higher vaccination rates have lower COVID rates. So there is that correlation, at least that relationship. So there is some data trickling in. So we'll see.
Yeah, Texas has basically no COVID right now.
Yes, they're saying Texas is a very interesting and strange phenomenon because Texas basically didn't have a shutdown, right? But your infection rate was pretty low.
No, we did have shutdowns early 2020. 2021, we pretty much took all of it off. We opened back up in, I think it was March. And then after we opened back up, our rates were going down. I know some states I look at a lot in the Johns Hopkins information. Maryland always pops up. So I always look at Maryland because that's the first state to pop up. Pennsylvania I look at because I'm originally from there. I look at Florida because Florida had got rid of a lot of their COVID restrictions even last summer. So July 2020. And you saw they trended low. Was that the warm weather and people weren't as sick, or is that something else? I don't know. But
Florida's Texas definitely,
Texas opened up earlier than a lot of the early, comparatively speaking, to a lot of the Northeast states, and COVID was down. I mean, you basically have none, and the vaccination rate here is okay. It's not out of the world, out of this world, but how many people were immune to it? How many people have natural immunity to it? You remember the cruise ship originally, right? They found,
Mhm.
I think, only 25% of people on that cruise ship got COVID. Well, why? Some people are naturally immune to it. You're on a
Mhm.
cruise ship, right? The air is recycling, right? They
Right.
keep you on a cruise
Right.
ship for a week. The air is
Right.
constantly recycling. You're not wearing masks, and the population is older because
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, cruising
No, I
industry
mean
is
that's just
great, but
fact.
mostly older people take cruises. So if only 25% of the people on that ship get it, you have to ask yourself, why didn't more people get it? Why don't 75% people have it? So
Right.
there are other factors going on. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, no, definitely interesting. But so I guess like before we run out of time, let's like talk about America's vaccine diplomacy, right? So you have like some who have been accusing of America of hoarding their vaccines, and China's like more selfless in distributing their vaccines. On the other hand, you have people, and I'm one of them, who think America's right in protecting its citizens first and then helping the world with the surplus. So, like I said, I'm of the later camp. What about you, Jason?
I definitely am. It's a national security issue. We have to take care of ourselves. If we're not around, who's going to protect us? Spoiler alert, no one. Europe doesn't care about the US.
Right. And
Japan's going to protect themselves. Don't blame them. Australia, same thing. Nobody's going to care about the US if we don't care about ourselves first. And then there'll be
agreed.
nobody left to protect the free world.
Yeah,
I hate to
no,
be so blunt about it, but
no, absolutely. And
an
we
American-centric
also have
world in that aspect.
right. Well, I'm sure other people disagree, but I agree with you because I'm an American.
Hey,
But
we'd love to hear the comments. If you disagree with us, please, we'd love to hear it.
yes,
If you think the US should send vaccines to Burundi first, that's fine. Or to Burma, Myanmar, that's okay. Let us know.
yeah,
But it'd
yeah,
be interesting.
definitely. So yeah, reach out to us because we're out of time for today. It was like a super interesting discussion. This whole COVID thing is super interesting. I'm sure we'll be talking about like the whole Wuhan like lab theory as we find out more about it. So other than that, is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers, Jason?
Yeah, we're gonna do sometime we're gonna do an episode. We're gonna try to reflect a little bit on COVID one of these
Mhm.
weeks and just talk about maybe like what we think the future is gonna hold, how it's gonna change us and everything. Just the CDC said, I think it was about a month ago, that they after the Fauci testimony that the pandemic's really kind of over. We can get back. We could start getting back to life as normal. If you recall
Mhm.
that. So
Yes.
I think that's an interesting topic. Like, how does this change the world moving forward?
Right. No, definitely. So join us here next week, right here on Liberated Panda Live, either Wednesday or Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Hope you enjoyed the show today and everyone have a great week. Bye, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye, guys.